And a lot of people vote with their feet. Either they leave Quebec and they go to Ontario because of all those languages and separatist talks, and they take their financial institutions with them and their finances and their investments, or they move down to Florida. It's about voting with your feet, but you actually vote yourself out of the country altogether.
And we're going to bring on Nick here, who was from Montreal his whole life, and he's been around all over North America, and he decided once and for all to move to the lovely country of Guatemala. We want to find out the difference between living in Quebec, which is apparently the most socialist, left-leaning place in all of North America.
And I found that feminism and progressivism and the left in general taking on a very totalitarian face. And thankfully I got out before it became too bad, but it's been scary to watch because the Canada I once knew is no longer there. It's become a shell of itself, and economically it's just intense. We printed more money in the past 2 years than the entire history of money. And
well, Nick, I have to tell you, I was doing just a couple of things that came up before the show, and to further that you're not missing much. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Here in just outside, well, in Montreal, it's a city within a city called Outremont. They just passed a law, these communists, that if the temperature outside is between 0 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, if you allow your car to keep running for more than, get this, 10 seconds, you could be susceptible to a big fine.
Yep.
There's
totalitarianism.
There are dog parks that have signs on them saying no barking allowed. That's in Montreal, brother.
How many bike paths you have in Antigua?
Here everything's privatized. Here, all the public hospitals are funded by the wealthy families, and there's no lineups. There's no wait. It's just instant service.
We're going to pay tribute to Gonzalo Lira, an original Red Pill man who unfortunately was killed in Ukraine for speaking the truth. He made a mistake going to find his sweetheart in Ukraine, right, Glenn? Which is kind of, I don't know, like I wouldn't find a Russian or Ukrainian women. I would more push them more towards the Western women because they've been corrupted, and those countries have been godless because of the communism.
Modern women want a traditional man, but a traditional man doesn't want a modern woman. And a high value man, of course, he's going to have much more of a selection. And believe it or not, the selection to the high value man is getting a little tight here.
Good day, brothers and sisters. And we are talking about Immigration Canada, which is now officially is population replacement policy in Canada. However, when we talk about changing those policies, and recently they changed the whole student visa for immigrants thing, and as we talk to Canada Central people, it doesn't really change much. It's just all an illusion. It's like a puff piece. It's like, oh, look, we're changing some things, but they're really not. The immigration isn't going to be stopped to Canada on any ways, and it's a discussion to be had. However, here today is a different discussion. A lot of people vote with their feet. Either they leave Quebec and they go to Ontario because of all those languages and separatist talks, and they take their financial institutions with them and their finances and their investments, or they move down to Florida. It's about voting with your feet, but you actually vote yourself out of the country altogether, and you move down to Central America, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, wherever you're going. There's a lot of examples of expats now living in Central America for many different reasons.
And we're going to bring on Nick here, who was from Montreal his whole life, and he's been around all over North America, and he decided once and for all to move to the lovely country of Guatemala, which they pronounce it Guatemala. There's no G. And Guatemala has a population of 17.2 million people. It has a GDP of $80 billion, so it has a good middle income country. It's the largest populated country in Central America. And the capital city has 5 million people, and that's also the biggest urban city in Central America. It's known for its volcanic landscape and its Mayan culture. Half the population is of indigenous Mayan descent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the great Mayans, they built the pyramids, and they were a very a philosophical group of people. I'm sure it's passed down to Guatemala. And Nick, we're welcoming you to the show. We want to find out the difference between living in Quebec, which is apparently the most socialist, left-leaning place in all of North America, to where you are in the lovely Guatemala.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Bienvenido a Guatemala. And thank you for having me on, Alex and Glenn. Well, it is night and day. And the longer I'm away, the happier I am. But if you look at the Guatemalan culture, it is one of community, God, and family. And frankly, all of those things have sort of disappeared in Canada over the past couple decades, I would say. And you've already given me all my talking points. You already given me more than half of the population is indigenous, and so they still wear their traditional garb, and they have a much stronger sense of community, and it's just a much more loving, lovely people. And I've been here for 6 years now. I've fully integrated into the society. And I think by the end of this show, you'll want to move down as well, but we'll see.
Another thing for people that I just did some research on was the indigenous have a name for that country. Their original was called Quetzaltemalan, which means place of many trees. And looking at you where you're sitting seems to validate that.
There's 26 different languages here. And before the Spanish came and colonized it, it was very segregated. So over time, the Spanish conquested everything, but there are still tribes that have never been touched by white colonial hands. And no, it's why I love it, because there's an innocence to the people, and there's a sort of tradition that has been unbroken for so many generations. And yeah, in a big city like Antigua, Guatemala, it's very cosmopolitan. There's lots of people wearing normal business clothes. But as soon as you go into the small towns, it becomes another world. It feels like you're transported into the ancient Mayan times.
You left the country 6 years ago. Was it right away a conscious move to leave, or was it like a temporary, I'll go there for a few weeks, figure it out, or you went on for vacation and you just stayed? Or 6 years ago you made a decision to leave Canada, and why?
Yeah, in other words, what made you want to vacate Montreal once and for all? Please.
I mean, for many reasons. I've been sort of red-pilled about Canada for quite a long time, and I'm a sociologist by training, so I always sort of do a multivariant analysis of a situation and try to figure out what is the best moving forward. And yeah, I just started to see this God-sized shaped hole in the community culture of Canada, and I found that feminism and progressivism and the left in general taking on a very totalitarian face. And thankfully, I got out before it became too bad. But it's been scary to watch because the the Canada I once knew is no longer there. It's become a shell of itself, and economically, it's just intense. I mean, we printed more money in the past 2 years than the entire history of money, and the men in French Canada have the highest suicide rates in the world. Uh, in China, it's female infanticide, and in Japan, it's older people. In Ireland, it's priests, but in Canada, it's young men who are taking their lives the most. And yes, 65% of millennial and Generation Z females are on antidepressants or have been on antidepressants in the past year. And I mean, the average 20-year-old man has the same testosterone as a 70-year-old. And so I felt like I was getting poisoned in Canada culturally, and with the actual food, glyphosates in the pesticides and fluoride in the water, and everything is radiated and genetically modified from California. And every time I came down to Guatemala, it was traditional Mayan agriculture, real organic food. Tomatoes tasted like tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
The people are happy. I mean, Guatemalans are the second happiest people in the world. I think it's one of the Scandinavian countries that are in front. But these people have nothing. And they are infinitely more happy than any Westerner I've ever met. And it's the type of place where everybody says hi to you, everybody smiles, everybody looks you in the eye. They're God-fearing people. They have a kindness and a gentleness that, frankly, makes me not want to return home.
We always talk about like Canada being a first world country, right? We know for a fact the infrastructure and all the socialist aspect of Canada, it really is not making it a first world country anymore. Like when you drive, even on the highways, the newly remodeled highways, you avoid potholes the size of the craters, and there's no active volcanoes in Canada, or there's no like active bombing by Russia. But you would think like it's in the middle of the Ukraine kind of thing. That's what the roads look like. Question is like, in terms of infrastructure and everything else, how is it compatible, and how are you able to to adjust from living in Canada versus Guatemala?
Well, I mean, frankly, I moved here because the medical infrastructure is better and the roads are better. The education is not, I mean, yeah, there's lots of Jesus, but it's not neo-Marxist, brainwashing. And so the weather is better, the climate, the people, the culture, the schools. I mean, depending on where you go, and obviously the private schools are much better. But frankly, I would prefer to send my child to a poor Guatemalan school than have them be indoctrinated in Canada. And so, on virtually every metric, even though Guatemala is much poorer, I got bit by a dog recently trying to save a puppy from a pit bull, and my hand was completely split open, and you can't even see the scar anymore. If that happened to me in Canada, I would have had to wait 14 hours to get any kind of service in the emergency room. In Guatemala, it took me 4 minutes. No, I mean, Canada used to be this bright, shining, beautiful country, and it's systematically been corrupted and collapsing. And I think Guatemala is going to become, and the third world is going to become, a much more pleasant place to live in the long term.
What's the matrix for that? What matrix are you using?
What matrix? Well, I mean, they've done a bunch of different studies. I mean, essentially, if you just look at general happiness, Guatemalans are doing better. But the 10 top cities coming up, Guatemala is number 3, Laos and Nigeria is number 2, and there's I think it's Vietnam, I forget, but Guatemala is the breadbasket of Central America. All it does is export goods. It has the largest water aquifer. It still has it's still a very Christian community, and they are completely independent from the government.
Are there LGBTQ clubs in the high schools?
No. I mean, it's a very machista society that's not tolerated. I mean, if you are trans, you will probably be bullied and picked on, and it's,
and move to Canada.
It's not the best way to deal with it, but frankly, it's better than tolerating obscenity, so.
It's strange what you just said. Canada is losing productive, good, honest people, and we're losing good people, and it's the bad people or the mixed up people that are coming in here where they can get accepted more. Like there's an overwhelming amount of people that are immigrating to Canada because of the LGBTQS ... policies that are going on. So obviously they feel much more wanted or accepted. I don't know about wanted, but accepted here. So, this neoliberalism, you can be anything that you want to be and the hell with everybody else. And yeah, okay, that's what's being more pervasive in today's society. But it doesn't bode well for tomorrow. And that's why there's people like you who see the writing on the wall and make the necessary adjustments at the time to have a better future for themselves. And you know what? I'm all for it. Good on to you, my brother.
Well, yeah. I mean, 425,000 Canadians have fled Canada since the pandemic. And I doubt any of them are coming back.
What about the scamdemic down there? Was it?
So this is the big contrast, and what was so shocking to me was, I mean, the beginning of the pandemic was horrific, because as soon as you implement lockdowns in the first world, you end up starving the third. I mean, most of Guatemala's income is from tourism. And so while all my friends are screaming, stay at home in Canada, I was watching a mass famine here. Literally thousands of families just lined up on the street, waving white flags, begging for food. I mean, it was horrific. And the thing is, the Guatemalans have common sense, so they woke up right away. They stopped the lockdowns pretty much immediately, and people just stopped obeying the mandates. And so Guatemala became a very
sorry, Nick. So mandates were implemented as well, right?
But very temporary.
Yes. I mean, I was on a state when the president said no one could leave their home for 4 days, and this poor woman was stuck in my house for 4 days, or else she would be arrested. In many ways, it was more harsh than Canada for the first month. They would arrest you if you were walking your dog. A lot of people, they were just starving, so they would just go out in the street hoping to get arrested so they could get fed in prison. I mean, it was that level of craziness. But as I said, it really opened up quickly after, and people started protesting. And I mean, while Canada continued for 2 more years going through complete insanity, Guatemalans just moved on with their lives and realized that this was a complete scandemic. I mean, I live next to 2 hospitals, and they were empty the entire time until the rollout of the vaccine. But that's another story.
Well, Canada's rating for tourism, you were talking about tourism. I was looking at Canada's rating is a level 3 security rating. It's a little bit more, you should be a little bit wary. And the reasons why were quoted as corruption, inequality, and high levels of violence and insecurity. Now that's the point of view over here. let's listen from you point of view from somebody who's been down there for 6 years.
So you mean like how Canada rates Guatemala level 3? So it's on a scale 1 to 10 scale.
So 1 to 5.
1 to 5. So 5 will be the worst possible, and 1 will and 1 is like going to what would be U.S. for example.
Depends what city of U.S. if you ask me, but no. So what do you think about that?
I think they just try to scare us so that people don't flee their own country. I think that there's a lot of fear mongering and propaganda in the Western media, so people don't realize how beautiful and nice and safe it is. I mean, Antigua is way safer than most American cities. So, yeah, I mean, I was a director of operations for 15 years in Canada and the property manager and the development and construction, but I saw firsthand how corrupt Canada was. From the plumbers to the electricians to the architects to everybody keeping their hand. And Canada likes to have this nice, shiny, perfect, image. But frankly, in many ways, I see it more corrupt than Guatemala. Because at least in Guatemala, the corruption works for the poor people. In Canada, it only works for the super rich. And in many ways, Guatemala is more free because of the corruption, because there's ways to get around the system and escape the matrix. But yeah, I'm more scared of going to Canada. I see it as being more dangerous, especially in the big cities, than here in Central America, as long as you're not stupid and walk around with gold chains in bad areas.
So you were involved in the construction industry up here in Montreal and Quebec. Well, just a little thing for our readers: the construction union is the strongest, most powerful union recognized in the whole world out of Quebec. Wow. And the reason why, it is a very corrupt industry. So you saw it firsthand, which didn't bode well inside of you. Your moral compass was telling you that maybe it was time to get out of here and right the wrongs and start over.
Yep, exactly. I mean, my quality of life is infinitely better here. In Canada, I had a very good salary. But in my neighborhood here, I know all my neighbors. I have children playing in the front. I get, they bring the goats to the front door, and then they milk the goats in front of you, and you get your fresh goat milk. And, I can afford to have a gardener and a cleaning lady and a personal chef if I wanted to. And it's because it's much more of a free market society. It's way less taxed. It's funny because, the salaries here aren't great necessarily, but the quality of life when it comes to, because the community is so tight-knit, they all work together to share what they have. So the tortilla lady comes here every day at noon, or the bread guy comes and delivers in the morning. And I have my fresh vegetables, that are organic and actually taste like vegetables, brought to my front door. And it's just such a slower, more relaxed, less stressful. It's like breaking out of the workaholic matrix and coming to absolute paradise and realizing, what have I done all my life? Why have I wasted so many years in cold communist Canada?
So what's the answer? Is because you didn't know any better?
I was stupid. Yeah, I didn't know any better. I mean, I didn't realize it because we're so trained to think that Canada's the best country, and it's embarrassing now that I think of it.
Well, we just had it. Remember, Glenn, we did the show on Ukrainians coming right now from the war-torn country, and I actually experienced it myself personally, Nick. where I met some
Yeah.
Ukrainian people, specifically women, that were able to escape. They came to Canada. It's like, what is this? And they left within a week. They left. Some of them went
Yeah.
back to Ukraine. They went back to the war. They couldn't stay in Canada. That's how terrible. And Canadians are so blind to the thing. It's incredible. But, you know, you got your beer, you got your Montreal Canadiens, you got your Toronto Raptors. You know, that's the thing, right? And
Your antidepressants.
you got your antidepressants, you got your transgender, you got your
Yeah.
fentanyl,
Give
you
them
got
bread and
weed, you got
circuses and
weed.
they'll never revolt.
You can get
Yeah.
your weed. You know, that's good. That's important for some people.
Well, Nick, I have to tell
Yeah,
you,
well,
you know, I was doing just a couple of things that came up before the show, and to further that you're not missing much. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Here in just outside, well, in Montreal, it's a city within a city called Outremont. They just passed a law, these communists, that if the temperature outside is between 0 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, if you allow your car to keep running for more than, get this, 10 seconds, you could be susceptible to a big fine.
Yep.
There's
Fascist totalitarianism.
there are dog parks that have signs on them saying no barking allowed. That's in Montreal, brother.
How many bike paths you have in Antigua?
None.
Do
But,
people
no.
Do people use bikes? I'm sure they do.
Well, this is the first World UNESCO Heritage Site, and so it was has been preserved in its exact state. So it looks identical to how it was 500 years ago.
Okay.
And so they're not allowed to put back bike paths. But by law, they have to have fountains and courtyards in every restaurant of a certain size. So, I mean, the McDonald's looks like a palace here. Everything is just beautifully done and maintained. And it's like you're walking through the 1500s. And so, yeah, no bike paths.
So another thing that happened in Canada, like I just heard last week, you know, obviously there's no snow in Guatemala, but I was listening to the show. Who's that? Valerie Plant, a mayor here. You know how she loves the bike paths because she creates 15-minute cities on behalf of World Economic Forum and other globalists. But we have a problem here. We cannot keep up with the street cleaning, even though this winter wasn't so bad. We only had like one snowstorm, maybe 1.5, and most of the snow's already melted. It's like +6. You know, people will blame it on climate change or whatever, blame it on chemtrails and just weather. But the point is, they have in the budget enough to clean the bike paths, but they didn't have in the budget to clean the handicap access points for like transportation and everything else. And now they made a huge deal out of it that they need to add something to the budget to address that. And also, Valerie Plante just approved a few weeks ago almost $2 billion to revitalization of Montreal. And how are they going to revitalize it? They're going to add more graffiti and more graffiti-like artwork to the city for $2 billion. What can you do with $2 billion in Antigua?
I mean, well, you could end all homelessness in Canada and Antigua and Guatemala. And this is what I mean by bureaucratic overbloat and corruption to the point where it's pure obscenity. I mean, half of our salaries in Canada, plus taxes, plus inflation, plus, provincial sales tax. It's too much. And maybe 5% of it goes to actually fixing the roads. I mean, the rest of it is just payoffs. We are living, our government right now is the most corrupt government we've had in Canadian history. And so, here everything's privatized. Here, all the public hospitals are funded by the wealthy families, and there's no lineups. There's no wait. It's just instant service with 20 doctors waiting in the emergency room for someone to come in. And so If that money came to Antigua, I mean, it would do a lot. But unfortunately, I don't think it will ever. It will just be given to the politicians in Canada.
Over there, you have the Mayan, the heritage sites like the Mayan pyramids, and over here in Montreal, our heritage site is the Olympic Stadium that they built for the '76 Olympics. They call it the Big O, the Big Olympic Stadium, but people in the know, we call it the Big Zero. It's been nothing but a money pit, and now they just said that to change the roof, which they keep doing, every X amount of years, and it keeps faltering. It's going to be $870 million. And we know
Oh
they're
my
going to
God.
go over budget. So that'll be over $1 billion just to put a top on a giant hole. It's nothing but a money pit that should be brought down and started over, maybe build some affordable housing. What do you think, big guy?
Oh God. I mean, and here, like with the previous president, every bridge that was built, they would put how much it cost to have it built, and to show the taxpayers that they were more honest. It's just, I mean, I guess it's like the 1950s in Canada, but it's just the time hasn't changed here in Antigua, and it happens in 80-year cycles. I mean, the government gets bigger and bigger, and the bureaucratic bloat and the inefficiency continues until it collapses. And I think we're just living through that collapse as we speak.
I think we need to add red pills to this conversation. I I mean, Nick, are you a single man?
Yes, well,
Ladies, brothers and sisters,
single.
I encourage you not only come down there to visit Nick because he has really good Airbnb properties, and we'll put some links in there for that, right, Nick? But also,
Yes,
are
sir.
you available, bachelor? The point
Yeah.
is, what I'm trying to say is, I guess we're going to pay tribute to Gonzalo Lira, the original Red Pill man, who unfortunately was killed in Ukraine for speaking the truth. Um, he made a mistake going to find his sweetheart in Ukraine, right, Glenn? Which is kind of, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't find a Russian or Ukrainian women. I would more maybe push them more towards the Western women because they've been corrupted, and those countries have been godless because of the communism. But now we know the, what do they call them, passport bros or whatever.
Passport bros. In other words, men are not
Yeah.
happy with the culture of things right now, the female woman side of things. So they're looking, they still want to get married, settle down, have kids. So they're flying to other countries where it's a little bit more traditional. You see, modern women want a traditional man, but a traditional man doesn't want a modern woman. And a high value man, of course, he's going to have much more of a selection. And believe it or not, the selection to the high value man is getting a little tight here. Before, you were talking about the difference between the social construct between the women and the men as opposed to the women and the men down there. Would you like to
Well, here
elaborate on
there's,
that, brother?
sure, of course. I mean, well, here you're allowed to be a man. Here there are clear, defined differences between men and women, and they have their different roles. And why would you want to stay in a country where the women are unhappy in the first place? Where statistically it's virtually impossible to maintain a long-term marriage. I mean, Generation Z, the millennials, the divorce rates astronomical. And so, you know, at some point you have to read the writing on the wall. The average Canadian woman, I mean, you go on a date with her, she has more red flags than a Chinese Communist parade. And like the reality here is that the women in Guatemala, they love their fathers. They want children. They they are in a small community that reinforces those beliefs and morals and values. I mean, Canada, because it's going through some sort of Bolshevik revolution and has become so communist, we have become demoralized. Our our women are depraved. Frankly, it's grotesque. And I mean, I don't say that lightly. I mean, I was very successful in Canada, but when you realize that statistically it's almost impossible to have a relationship longer than 7 years in my country, when you want to start a family and have something traditional, it just, I mean, the definition of insanity is repeating yourself and bashing your head against the wall. And, at some point I just said, look, I've had enough. I can't. It's, it's not worth, it's squeezing blood from a stone.
It has been said that dating today in Canada or most Western neoliberalist style countries, it's like playing a part in a horror movie. The problems are there are too many options, a very low or no moral value, and this ideology that nobody is good enough. In other words, there's a rampant desire for better. And it's continuous, this not, I think I can get better. I think I can get better. I can get more. No, this is not good enough for me. And what that does, it leads to a culture of unfulfilled or dissatisfied people.
Yeah, man, who wants to live in a country where all the women are unhappy? And I mean, it's women's own fault. I mean, feminism has destroyed themselves. Unfortunately, you know, women by nature are hypergamous, and so they want a man that's more successful, taller, better looking, and
Just explain to
because
the
women have,
audience. Hypergamous means they're chasing the top 10%.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, 5% now. I mean, men swipe right half the time, or I think actually more like 70% of the time, and women swipe once in 40. So 100% of the women are now going for 5% of the men. And it's great if you're that 5%, you have all the options in the world. So then why would you want to settle down in the first place? And then women get the impression that all men are players and scum because they're all going for the same few guys.
Herein
And
lies
it's
the
just
problem,
this,
Nick. The poor girls, they're always, they sweep so often because they're looking for the G-man. But what they don't know is the G-man isn't on these social media sites. I'm a traditional man. I don't do this stuff.
Well, and that's the
yeah,
point. How do
well,
you actually that you guys brought up a good point? Like traditional men are not on dating apps, and most men
yeah,
of age of any kind of success, they already found what they're looking for. And the men that are not looking for anything and they just want to have occasional fun with whatever women, they're definitely not looking for any kind of women in general in terms of any kind of long-term relationship or anything like this. So the women are kind of chasing their own tail, right? In that sense. And
well, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean, the culture and what we have told women, I mean, we have just lied to an entire generation of women, and they're just now starting to figure it now out. And it breaks my heart because, I love Canadian women. I love my country, and I feel bad because we told women that they can have fun, that they could fool around, that they could wait and do their careers, and that they're a powerful, independent, and strong woman. Independent from what? From your children, from your husband, from a life that would make you ultimately happier than your career. And so, you know, right now, I would say half women I know from my generation are trying to do in vitro fertilization and failing. And so I can't, it's a shame because it's
but
almost
they
like we
have
need
careers,
re-education.
Nick. But they have careers.
Yeah,
How dare you? They have careers. They have a bank account. You know.
The most
I know.
important
And it's,
job a person will ever have is that of being a parent. And you were saying that, well, now it's about their careers. We've said this before. what do you have a contract with Hollywood? You got to do 3 movies in the next 5 years?
You can't get pregnant. Yeah.
Or do you play with the Montreal? You play hockey for the Montreal Canadiens? You know, you got a big contract. That's your career. No, you have a job. Job usually in the Western culture means just over broke. After you pay your taxes and the cost of living is so high here, you get stressed out. You're saying, "Wow, it's like I want to try and go up the financial mountain, but it's all icy and I keep slipping. The faster I go, the harder I work. I'm not moving anywhere." And with inflation creeping up ever so exponentially, it makes it even harder for people, for the women.
Yep.
Nick.
Well, I mean, yep.
Yeah.
You were also saying that a lot of people are having a hard time procreating here. I just reading that now there are more immigrants coming to America than actual American babies being born in America.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's the great replacement conspiracy, which is not a conspiracy.
It's an invasion.
And it's happening before. Yeah, I mean,
it's an immigration policy.
Culturally, well, in 1908, Western civilization and Europeans represented 48% of the population. And then now we are just about 6%. And then by next generation, we're going to be less than 0.5%. So, I mean, this is the end of Western civilization just from a numeric perspective, especially when we're having such hordes of immigration that don't necessarily have our same beliefs and cultural values. And
Nick, you're not helping. You're going to be in Guatemala. You're going to find yourself a nice Mayan girl, and your kids are not going to be white, man.
Oh, I don't know about that. We'll see. I mean, there are plenty of lovely white women here too, and it's something I've thought about. But at the same time, I love Latinas are just very lovely people. So you'll come and visit, and you'll see for yourself.
I'm sure.
Hey, last question we have here for you. It's kind of an important one. What would it take for Canada to turn around? Where you just said before that you love your country. What would it take for Canada to turn around? Whereas you would come back.
Well, firstly,
think of leaving Guatemala to come back to your old country.
I mean, that's a very good question, and unless the entire mainstream media collapses in the near future, and there's our let them eat cake moment, where we have a revolution, where we get rid of the people that are in charge, the real people in charge, not the puppets that run the government. Frankly, I used to be on the left when I was much younger. What's the expression? When you're young and conservative, you have no heart, and when you're old and liberal, you have no brain. Well, I've moved past conservative, and I'm verging on anarcho-capitalist libertarian. So my belief system doesn't coincide with the culture of Canada at the moment. And the only way I would go back is if there is a radical revolution and, frankly, re-education camps, because it's unfortunate. Most of the education that we've been taught in Canada is a lie. And it's very hard to disbelieve someone, to convince someone. It's much easier to convince someone of a lie than to convince them of the truth. And especially if that truth means that their entire lives have been an illusion. And so right now in Canada, there's a mass formation psychosis. And once that's broken, once there's some more stability and a completely different leadership, or frankly, a population that doesn't listen or obey or comply to that leadership, then I'll return home. But frankly, I think it's too late. I think Canada is so lost, and the average Canadian believes in such absurdities that they commit atrocities. I mean, I still can't have a conversation with 95% of my friends in Canada. I mean, I spoke out against the mandates and the vaccines. I predicted all of this in 2019. And unfortunately, I was right, and not a single person has been able to talk to me ever since. And so,
It's lonely at the top, you see? In the
oh
end,
man, it's time will tell, right? But
the truth always comes out and you will be vindicated. Listening to you, would it be safe to say that you're a Trump, make America great again type mentality person?
well, if you put a gun to my head and had to choose between Biden and Trump, obviously I would choose Trump. A couple of years ago, I was a huge Trumper. Now my fear is that he's just controlled opposition for a group of oligarchs and puppets. I mean, maybe it's the oligarchs and puppets I like, and I could go on to a whole slew of who I think they are. And I think we're going through a change of the guards in the higher echelons of the secret societies and the billionaire class and our elite psychopath class. But, you know, yeah, Trump, at least the word freedom is not hate speech when he's in power, you know. Right now, you know, Joe Biden terrifies me. I've seen the contents of the laptop. I've seen everything, and it disgusts me. And of course, trying to convince someone on the left of who Biden is like pulling teeth. So even with the laptop being proven real, God, the gaslighting. Anyway, I digress. Trump is. I hope that Trump does what he says, but he was for the vaccine. He made a lot of promises that he didn't keep, and he's a bit pro-Israel as well. And you know, right now Israel is the tail that's wagging the dog. You know, their lobby is so powerful in the West that essentially we live in banana republics. And my fear is that this is all pantomime, and the U.S. as well as Canada are banana republics. And I'm saying this while living in Guatemala, the very first banana republic.
I think Guatemala exports most bananas than any other country in the world. I think that's the key export, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's known there was a huge genocide here in the 80s, and that's why the Guatemalans don't trust their government or the West at all. And it's because of the CIA backed, you know, and there's about a fruit company, and there's a whole history. But Guatemala got the nickname of being the most corrupt country in all of the Americas. And so, hence the name Banana Republic.
Glenn, I mean, we can talk about this forever, and I'd like to have Nick again on our show in the future for sure, and we can discuss specific subject. This is just an intro show, and it's definitely a red pill moment for a lot of people, and I advise people to get outside of Canada to see for themselves what the world is like without, you know, if a lot of people that, for example, never been to Mexico, and because they've been taught by Canada.ca that they shouldn't travel to Mexico. It's really, really dangerous. And how many Canadian expats live in Mexico, for example, and they'll tell you completely opposite. They'll tell you exactly what you told us today. Don't believe none of that. So you should compare it. My last question is some people will look at you as a sort of the traitor is a strong word, but based on my example with my family migrating from Russia in the 90s, where Russia was wild west, with the Western world dismantling it and being so corrupt and crime ridden and all this other stuff. My family ran for the better future to Canada, and then Canada, you know, caught up with all this corruption and communism and authoritarianism, and it's a lot worse in Canada than Russia ever was. Even Soviet Union that I experienced as a kid. You know, and now I'm faced with the decision like, okay, my family already ran once, and everything you're saying is so appealing, and especially like all the red pill moments, the family oriented, women, culture, etc. I would love to move to Guatemala and experience what you experience in long term, but a big part of me is saying like, no, but at some point you got to stop running. And like you're saying, you actually called earlier for
You're
revolution of
betraying
some
your
sort.
country.
Yeah, can I like, I'm faced with this decision now. Should I come join you, or should I stay in Canada and face it?
I mean, I had the same conundrum as well. I, my plan was to be a snowbird and do 6 months in Canada and 6 months here initially, but it's just become too toxic. I mean, there's no freedom of speech. I I spoke out the loudest. I was the first one in my friend group to really just go against the mandates, and I mean, cancel culture came for me. And it's weird being outside of Canada because when you're in Montreal, you don't see the prison walls. You don't see the walls of your own, incarceration. But then you come here and you realize, oh, I could just get a license like that. And it doesn't take 5 years and 4 exams, and you can have one beer and they'll take away your entire license I mean, it's just changing permits every time or switching sides on the street, or it's like they've made all this extra bureaucracy and this entire construct that makes our lives more difficult and miserable, and it just adds to our enslavement. And I was a successful director and manager for many years in Canada, but I was a prisoner. I was enslaved, and it's only when I escaped that world where I wasn't being taxed to death, where I didn't work 80 hours a week. It's a culture of enslavement. It's the tyrannical matriarchy that devours its own children. It is very oppressive, and you don't realize it until you start speaking to Guatemalans here, and they have real freedom of thought, and they do whatever they want, and they just ignore the government, they ignore the police, and they have their own cultural mores and vigilantism and their own structure that doesn't require government. And that's really what I think is an ideal model and fit for me. And so you have to ask yourself, like, is Canada worth fighting for? When it's 6 months of freezing cold, 2 months of too hot, you go into the country and the bugs eat you alive. I mean, the women are undateable. The architecture is ugly. I mean, you know how to demoralize and depress a society? Do what Canada does. Neo-Marxist indoctrination to toddlers, hypersexualization of children. I mean, it is so far from God and from what is natural in nature. It disgusts me. I speak to Canadian women and men. I mean, I've had some Canadians come here, and it's terrifying because they're lost. They have no community. And when you don't believe in God, if you believe in nothing, you'll fall for anything. And now government is God. Now I am the sacrilege for going against their holy, holy Trudeau.
Nothing we need to worry about. He doesn't have long to go. Actually, that's a good news. Their tides are shifting. Which way they're shifting, we don't know, but they're definitely shifting. Glenn, how do you close the show?
Well, I don't think we've given up on Canada yet. No way. We're here to fight. G-Man has never been one to run away from conflict, confrontation. We're the type of people that we are not oppressed. The bullies, we bully the bullies. I believe that Canada started a chain of events that's happening around the world where the people are waking up. We had the truckers convoy protesting downtown. Ottawa, the capital for Canadian rights. It seems to be manifesting in many countries around the world now. So they're following our lead. As what the big man said, it looks like Justin Trudeau was on his last days. He seemed to have had more lives than Morris the cat, but too bad. The Rottweiler just tore apart the cat. And when it comes to the media, even that, like in America, the mainstream media is losing its relevance when you have people like Tucker Carlson going out there and having more views at something he does for 2 hours talking to a world leader than all the biggest mainstream media networks in America combined. And also we find out just today that Bell Media here in Canada, which is a publicly traded country, was given $40 million of taxpayers' dollar to endure the changes that they had to make. And what the changes they did was they're laying off 4,800 people, and they're going to be selling off a lot of their so-called assets, like radio stations. And that is because the average person is not watching this type of news as much as they used to. And more people are gravitating towards watching stuff like we do here on the Saz Show and having great guests like yourself, Nick, from the lovely Guatemala. And we'd like to thank you for coming on, taking the time to coming on and showing us the differences. And one thing I'd like to say, Nick, is don't give up on us yet. We're here to fight. And you know what? When we fight, we win.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
I still fight from afar, and yes, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that I can come back, and hopefully you'll decide to become a snowbird and spend 6 months here and 6 months in Canada.
That's a good hopium suggestion, and I'll definitely come visit you, and I'll make a decision based on my experience. Thank you, Nick, so much for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your experience. We'll see a lot more of you on our show. I really enjoyed this. That was really, really good. And I'm hoping to go there and shoot a live show there. We'll shoot a little documentary maybe or something. Thank you so much again, Glenn, for sharing your wisdom with me here today. And brothers and sisters, this has been a good one, and we'll see you on the next one. Glenn, we make a community worse for everyone.